light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. I have commented to a few friends that sometimes the most important freedom that we still have is the freedom to disagree. But I think in every case it adds depth to our understanding, to understand why we believe what we do. If I am simply parroting what somebody else has said, anyone who is doing fact-checking may bring up things that totally derail me. And they don't necessarily need to, but I do need to think about what they said. I was, in recent weeks, I've been researching a phenomenon called SBNR, spiritual but not religious. The curious thing I'm finding about it is that all the sources that I'm finding, all the texts that I'm finding, are written by people who do not identify as spiritual but not religious. It's kind of like learning about the Druids from the Romans, because the Druids didn't keep written records. They were an oral culture. And I'm finding more and more that there is enormous value in the oral cultures that humanity has known, but the problem is that they have not been documented because they do not write about themselves. All the records we have are observations written about them by someone else, someone who does not identify as such. It's kind of like when I was in the acting school in New York City many years ago, at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and the way we were taught, I guess you would say, was to not simply say the lines of the script, but to be the person experiencing what the words say. So it's not that they're seeing an actor saying the lines, they're seeing the person about whom the play is written. It's not that we're observing the Druids in the same way that the Romans observed the Druids. We are listening to a Druid and feeling what a Druid feels, and coming to an understanding of why the Druid made the choices the Druid did. And I don't know if any of the Romans ever fully understood that, because when it came down to it, they had an intellectual knowledge of the Druids, but they did not have an experiential knowledge of the Druids. The topic I really wanted to address today, though, is this whole notion of disagreement and protest. The thing if you're going to do a protest, the first thing to bear in mind is that you have to know what you're protesting. If you're not clear in your own understanding of protest, it's very difficult to convey effectively what you want to convey. If you're doing a protest and someone wants to know what can be done or what can anyone say that would make you say, okay, we're satisfied, now we're going home. If there is no answer to that question, then my question is, are you just out there being troublemakers or rabble-rousers, or are you actually protesting something that you can name? If you can't name it, how can you protest it? The flip side of that, of course, is when people are not allowed to protest because the people in power do not want to be questioned. They do not want to be examined. They do not want their motives or their values to be made known to the public. And so that is why, in the United States at least, there was this constitutional protection for the right to protest the government. But it needs to be done intelligently. And that freedom, the Constitution guarantees, but it's not always respected. And there are governments and corporations and state governments, national governments, all sorts of different and special interest groups who do not want the protest to happen because they do not want what they are doing to be made known. And so to do a protest effectively, my first question is, do you have specific information? Do you have a specific goal? What exactly are you protesting, and how will you know when your protest has been heard? Very often the reason people resort to protest is because they have tried to make their complaints or their alarm their concern. They've tried to make it known in other ways, and no one seems to be listening. People have said, why don't you write to your senators and congressmen? And I said, I have, but everything I get back tells me that they're listening to the corporations more than they're listening to me. And to me, people have sometimes talked about the separation between church and state, because in human history there have been examples where a particular religion ran the government and basically annihilated everyone who disagreed with it. Quote, heretics, which all that really means is someone who disagrees with you. And I find it amusing but a bit disconcerting that the college I went to and from which I got a Bachelor of Arts in Humanities was a school that was very fond of John Calvin. And one of the philosophy students at the school was always making a joke that he thought we should celebrate Michael Servetus Day. Well, Michael Servetus was a theologian who was burned at the stake by John Calvin. Both of them were theologians. The reason Michael Servetus died at the stake by being burned at the stake was that he disagreed with John Calvin, and John Calvin represented a powerful interest that had the ability to actually kill Michael Servetus for disagreeing, because Michael Servetus had no right to disagree. He had no freedom to disagree. And there wasn't latitude in their theological discussions for Michael Servetus to believe anything that John Calvin didn't. And because it's kind of the old saying, might makes right, and I hope nobody really believes that. It's been demonstrated that way many times in human history, but it has never been an effective way of creating the wholeness. A TV series that really spoke to me quite a bit in the past was called Babylon 5, which was essentially a space station where humans and aliens were supposed to work out their differences without coming to blows, without actually getting in a fight with each other. And as part of the whole evolution of that series, they essentially develop a version, I guess, of the United Nations, where each planet or perspective, if you will, is able to send a representative, and they have this big council that they begin to call the Interstellar Alliance. And when I was watching this series, I was so impressed by the principles of the Interstellar Alliance that were presented. You know, when they had to decide, what are we all going to sign our names to? What are we all going to agree upon as our creed, our charter? And there was one particular alien named Jakar who wrote this, the principles of the Interstellar Alliance. And I don't ever want to forget them, because they're so, it touches so much on the heart of things. And so I would like to read that and share it with you now. And I share this with the encouragement to, if you haven't seen that show, to please do so. I'm receiving no money for doing this. I am just so impressed with the wisdom it conveys that I want that wisdom to live on beyond me, beyond the series, beyond any of us. The universe speaks in many languages, but only one voice. The language is not Narn, or human, or Centauri, or Gaiam, or Minbari. It speaks in the language of hope. It speaks in the language of trust. It speaks in the language of strength and the language of compassion. It is the language of the heart and the language of the soul, but always it is the same voice. It is the voice of our ancestors speaking through us, and the voice of our inheritors waiting to be born. It is the small, still voice that says, we are one. No matter the blood, no matter the skin, no matter the world, no matter the star, we are one. No matter the pain, no matter the darkness, no matter the loss, no matter the fear, we are one. Here, gathered together in common cause, we agree to recognize this singular truth and this singular rule, that we must be kind to one another. because each voice enriches us and ennobles us, and each voice lost diminishes us. We are the voice of the universe, the soul of creation, the fire that will light the way to a better future. We are one. We are one. I think the words that stand out to me the most, because Jakar was from a planet that had known oppression, that had been conquered and ruled in a tyrannical, hideous sort of way, and many people had died, many of his people. And yet he still could say, having that experience and having that at the core of his culture, no matter the pain, no matter the darkness, no matter the loss, no matter the fear, we are one. There is nothing about the oppression that his people experienced that invalidated the fact that the voices of his oppressors and the voices of his people each contributed something to the common understanding. So when protest is put down and when the dialogue doesn't happen and when the voices are not heard and people are not allowed to speak, that's different than saying, if you wish to speak, gather your thoughts. Do you have something to say, or do you simply want to say something? That's a witticism I've heard over the years too. And we need to take the time to have something to say. Not just that we want to say something. We're frustrated, we're upset, we don't like the injustice we've witnessed, and that's understandable. You still have to take the time to figure out what it is you want to say in response. And if you're going to do a protest, to figure out what it is you want to say and who you're saying it to, and if the people in power will not listen, what methods do we use to get them to listen? I mean, at the final end of the spectrum is terrorist activity. People who resort to bombs and guns and terrorist activities because nobody will listen to them. And nobody will care that there are voices that are being lost. And it is diminishing the universe's ability to form life in all of its diverse forms. Somehow we need to save those lives. And we need to listen to them and figure out what it is their concern and why isn't it happening. And we can do that without violence, and we don't have to make someone resort to terrorism to get their message through. We can listen to them before they ever have to do that. But if we don't listen, we have to expect that at some point they will speak and we don't listen, and they will shout and we don't listen, they will stand on a chair and we don't listen, they will throw something and break a window and we still don't listen, they will grab us by the shoulders and shake us and we still don't listen. What do they have to do to get us to listen? They are a life with a voice that has something to contribute. And if we value them as much as, no more and no less than we value ourselves, then their voice and our voice and everyone's voice will come together to form a universe in which everyone can live. And if there is someone who is wrestling with the effects, or maybe they're not even wrestling, maybe they don't realize that they are expressing and demonstrating the effects. To me, greed is a mental illness, and it needs to be recognized as such and dealt with as such. And whether it is someone in a political position or a military position or a church position or a communal position, when people begin to act from a place of greed and a place of obsession, they are experiencing a mental illness. And the community around them needs to recognize that as a mental illness and address it as such and somehow deal with it effectively, to make them stop, to stop them from doing violence to others because of what they're perceiving. Because what they are perceiving comes through the lens of selfishness and greed, and both of those are mental illnesses. We need to bring them mental health so that they understand themselves as relational individuals, that there is something totally unique to who and what they are that the rest of us need, and that cannot be expressed in selfish or greedy ways without losing the message, without losing the value of what they have to contribute. By being a community and finding our individuals, no matter how eccentric they may be, and finding ways to nurture them and ways to help them understand that you are relational. There is no example of individuality that can survive without a constellation of relationships. And yet in that constellation, we are trying to make sure that everyone has enough. And once everyone has enough, if someone has more and someone has less, I don't know that I've ever really cared whether someone has more, as long as I have enough. And if the distribution of resources will support someone having more because they're feeling the need to have more, well, fine, let them have more if they feel the need. But if they are wrestling with the mental illnesses of selfishness and greed, both of which are mental illnesses, then I need to be concerned enough about their mental health to step forward and say, please listen to me. Whether it's talking to them, whether it's putting them in a situation, whether it's managing their resources for them, somehow our psychologists and our psychiatrists need to understand how, and need to teach the rest of us, how do we deal effectively with the mental illnesses of selfishness and greed, and how do we preserve the right to protest, not because we want something big and noisy and disturbing to happen on the steps of our state and our federal legislative buildings, but because we want to know what those people have to say and we want to address it effectively. And if we're not addressing it effectively, we want them to have the right to assemble and disagree with us in a way that we will listen. And the only reason that we have the right to protest is because there have been so many instances in which administrators and people simply did not listen. If we're not going to listen, we can hardly fault them for speaking louder. If we're not going to listen to their loud words, we can hardly fault them for acting them out in ways that are supposed to get our attention. If we are so stingy with giving our attention and so stingy with giving whatever resources are needed, if we don't have them, they would probably understand that. If we do have them and we're simply not willing to share them, we ourselves may be the face in the mirror, may be the one in the grips of the mental illnesses of selfishness and greed. Every spiritual system known to humanity addresses those two and recognizes them as mental illnesses. They may not call them as such, but they're in every single belief system of which I've ever heard. There is something that says the orphan and the widow and the one person in need in your community is the person about whom the community needs to care. And if we have part of the world going forward into the 21st century with computers and mobile phones and energy efficient houses and electrical systems and energy systems and all kinds of things, at the same time as we have people who are still living 200 or 300 years in the past because we have decided they don't matter, I don't even want to. Do you really want me to go into what I say and think about that? From my perspective, everyone matters, because it's well known that Leonardo da Vinci, one of the greatest engineering and artistic minds in human history, was the bastard son of a peasant. He was an illegitimate child born to a poor person. If Leonardo da Vinci could be the bastard son of a peasant, then it could happen again at any point. And I have to wonder if every single child that is born might be a Leonardo da Vinci. If given the right nurturing and the right development and the right support, every person born might be a Leonardo da Vinci. And yet, kind of like the tombstone, if I ever have one, I've encouraged people to make my epitaph on my tombstone. I would have done so much more if I hadn't spent so much time fighting for survival. A lot of people have been asking me for more shows, and I would be happy to do a show every week if I could, but I'm sorry, at the moment I'm a very anomalous person with an anomalous voice and an anomalous perspective. As such, there was a very high cost for not being able to fit in. And as an autistic, I'm one of 2% of the population. As someone with A negative blood, I'm one of the 6% of the population. As an autistic, I'm one of 2% of the population. It seems like I'm a minority no matter which way you measure me. But the problem with all of that is that if you can't fit in, the economic systems of the world have a very hard time valuing you and giving you what you need. And so I spend an inordinate amount of time fighting for survival. And as much as I would love to be doing a new show every single week, I don't quite have the resources to do that because my local support is not that great. All that being said, I am Sister Who, and I am an interfaith minister. It's not something I do, it's who I am. And because of that, to the best of my ability, I intend to keep producing the shows. There is something about the person who is completely different from you, the one who is protesting what you are doing, that it behooves you so much to listen to what he or she has to say, because what he or she has to say could be the thing that finally makes you understand something you've been looking at in the mirror all your life. Something about yourself that was there, you took it as normal, you took it for granted maybe even. And with that, there were things about yourself that you never fully understood and you didn't even realize that you didn't understand them. And the only way it comes to light is by talking with someone who is completely different from you. So when someone does a protest, defend their right to protest and engage them in dialogue, because they may be saying something that you need to hear. They may be trying to get you to listen to something that may be uncomfortable to hear, but it may be uncomfortable because they don't know how to say it. And only through someone who has the ability to sift it all out and figure out what is at the heart of it. And okay, you're saying this is your concern, right? Okay, except that if black people are protesting white people, the problem is not white people, the problem is white supremacy. Not all white people believe in white supremacy. White supremacy, most people would agree, is bad, unless of course you're a white supremacist. My apologies, but I'm not a white supremacist. My apologies only to offending people, I suppose. I don't apologize for being someone who opposes white supremacy, but I understand that it's not white people, it's white supremacy. I read an article once written by a black woman. I found it so insightful and brilliant. I wish I remembered her name, but she was basically describing how she was trying to teach her son about racism. And they went to post office and she was treated badly and she stepped back and watched. She took the time to watch and discovered that no, actually the gentleman behind the counter wasn't being racist. He was obnoxious to everyone. And so then she had to go the other way, and her conclusion at the end of this article was that if you want to erase racism, the two things that stand in the way are people who think that everything is racism and people who think that nothing is racism. And somewhere between the two we have to have discernment, as she demonstrated, by taking the time to listen and look and watch and understand what is going on. I was talking about this when I was in my master's program once, and someone commented that they were working at a fast food restaurant, and she was the shift manager, and she's got 4 people talking to her at once, and the beeper is going off on the French fries, and all this stuff is happening. It's total chaos. And on the other side of a counter, a black man asked her, "Are you treating me badly because I'm black?" And she was like, "What? Huh? No." It was a situation of pure chaos. She wasn't trying to treat him badly. She was trying to deal with a situation that was absolutely chaotic. And he didn't look at her context. And she was just as nice to him as she was to every other customer. She was not racist. But trying to prove that to him while standing in a situation of chaos can be difficult. How do you treat everyone the same? How do you be a person who is not a racist when you're in a situation that is pulling at you in so many ways that it is just overwhelming? And being an autistic, I know something about feeling overwhelmed, but I have only my own experience by which to reference it. when you feel overwhelmed, you say things in a tone of voice you didn't mean. You address people in ways that have nothing to do with them and everything to do with the amount of chaos you're trying to manage. When it comes to protest, we have to have it. It has to be there. It has to be safe. But we have to recognize that there are people who take advantage of that right and abuse it, because everything is a tool. It can be used or it can be abused. And there may be people who piggyback on that protest to do something that even the protesters would not approve of, that to do something that they would oppose, and maybe the oppressors and the protesters would have a common enemy if they looked at the person who was taking advantage of the moment. The bottom line that I'm trying to get through all of this is to defend the protester, but to encourage and nurture the protester to think about what it is they want. And you don't like that, I understand. How do you want it to be? I'm listening. And now that I'm listening, tell me how you want it to be. Think it through. Decide what you're protesting for, not just what you're protesting against. And have the courage to speak out, to understand something that is more important than all the difficulties you'll encounter by speaking out. Thank you very much for watching. I hope some of the things I've said in the last half hour have been helpful to you.